Somewhere along a dusty Montana highway, a Harley-Davidson rumbled against the endless stretch of road, carrying a woman who had spent her whole life running. She wasn't looking for a place to stay, she wasn't looking for him, but in the quiet town of Clearwater, where time moved slower and kindness was still currency. One broken engine, one chance encounter, and one unexpected act of generosity would change everything. Because sometimes the right person can make you stop running, and sometimes the place you least expect becomes home. Before we dive into this unforgettable journey of love, healing, and second chances, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss a single chapter of this heartwarming story. If you love small-town romance, characters with depth and stories that stay with you long after the last page, this one is for you. Now, settle in, because this is the story of the kind-hearted mechanic. Let's begin. Poor mechanic repairs a girl's bike, unaware. She's a secret billionaire looking for a genuine man. The town of Clearwater, Montana, basked in the golden glow of the late afternoon sun. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where the biggest excitement was the annual rodeo, and where strangers were noticed the moment they arrived. At the far end of Main Street, nestled between a weathered diner and an aging gas station, sat Holt's Auto Repair. The garage had been a fixture in town for decades, passed down from father to son. The sign above the entrance was faded, the paint peeling at the edges, but the name still held weight among the locals. Inside the shop, Asher Holt was elbow-deep in the engine of an old Ford truck, the scent of motor oil thick in the air. His hands, calloused from years of labor, moved with practiced ease, tightening a bolt before he wiped the sweat from his brow. The world outside was quiet, just the distant hum of cicadas and the occasional truck rolling by. Then a new sound cut through the stillness. A Harley-Davidson struggling, its engine sputtering in protest before finally dying just outside the shop. Asher glanced up, his brow furrowing. A rider swung off the bike, removing a sleek black helmet to reveal chestnut waves of hair that tumbled past her shoulders. Even from a distance, there was something about her, an air of confidence mixed with exhaustion, as though she'd been running from something for a long time. She examined her bike with a sigh, brushing dust off her worn leather jacket before looking up. Her eyes, a striking shade of green, sharp and assessing, locked onto Asher's, and for a second he forgot what he was supposed to say. "You work here?" she asked, her voice smooth but edged with fatigue. "Yeah," Asher replied, stepping closer. "Looks like you've got some trouble." "You could say that." She sighed again and patted the fuel tank. "She's been giving me hell for the last 20 miles. Figured I'd push my luck and make it to the next town, but, well, here I am." Asher crouched beside the Harley, running a practiced hand along the frame before checking the exhaust. "You lost power on the highway?" "Yeah." Sputtering, then nothing. "Probably an ignition coil issue," he muttered, mostly to himself. He stood, wiping his hands on a rag. "I can take a look. Won't take long to diagnose, but if it's what I think, I'll need to order a part. Might take a day or two." The woman hesitated, then nodded. "All right. Guess I'm sticking around for a bit." She extended a hand. "Serafina, but most people call me Sarah." "Asher," he replied, shaking her hand. Her grip was firm, a little unexpected. There was strength there, a quiet resilience he didn't usually see in travelers passing through Clearwater. "You from around here?" he asked, as he wheeled the bike inside the shop. Sarah leaned against the doorway, watching him work. "Nope, just passing through." "Where to?" she smirked. "Haven't figured that out yet." Asher shot her a glance but didn't press. He knew better than to push for answers people weren't ready to give. Instead, he focused on the bike, moving with the kind of ease that came from years of fixing things. Sarah wandered the garage as he worked, her fingers grazing the edge of a well-worn toolbox. This place has been here a while, huh? My dad opened it when he got back from Vietnam, kept it running until he passed. Now it's just me." She paused, studying him. "That must be tough." Asher shrugged. "Some days more than others." A comfortable silence settled between them, punctuated only by the occasional clang of a wrench. "You ever worked on a bike before?" Asher asked after a moment. Sarah smirked. "A few. My dad used to tinker with them before." She stopped, then shook her head. "Let's just say I picked up a thing or two." Asher raised an eyebrow, but handed her a wrench. "Then you might as well make yourself useful." To his surprise, she didn't hesitate. She crouched beside the Harley and started working, moving with the precision of someone who knew what they were doing. It caught him off guard, but he didn't comment. Instead, they worked side by side, the hum of the radio filling the space. Between them, after a while, Sarah leaned back, wiping grease from her fingers. "So, do you fix bikes for free, or is this just my lucky day?" Asher smirked. "Depends on the person." "Ah, so I'm special." He met her gaze, something unspoken passing between them. "Maybe." She held his stare for a moment longer, before standing. "I owe you a drink, then." "Fair trade," Asher said, leaning against the workbench. Sarah reached for her helmet but hesitated. "Any recommendations?" "Jake's Tavern down the road. Good whiskey, terrible karaoke." She grinned. "Sounds like my kind of place." With that, she swung her leg over the Harley, giving him one last look before kicking the engine to life. This time, it purred beneath her like it should. "See you around, Asher?" And then she was gone, disappearing down the road, leaving only the scent of gasoline and something else Asher couldn't quite place. As he stood there, staring, after her, he had the strangest feeling that something had just changed, though he wasn't sure what. All he knew was that he wanted to see her again. Sarah hadn't planned on staying in Clearwater. She had stopped in plenty of towns like this before. Quiet places with diners serving bottomless coffee, dusty roads leading nowhere in particular, and people who lived simple, predictable lives. She usually fueled up, rested for a night, and moved on before sunrise. But as she rode down the dimly lit main road toward Jake's Tavern, she couldn't shake the feeling that this town was different. Or maybe it was him, Asher Holt. There was something about the mechanic with the steady hands and unreadable eyes that intrigued her. He hadn't asked why she was here, where she was going, or what she was running from. He had just helped without expectation or judgment, and she wasn't used to that. The neon sign outside Jake's Tavern flickered in protest, casting an orange glow onto the gravel parking lot. Inside, the place was exactly what she expected. Low ceilings, wooden bar stools that had seen better days, and a jukebox playing Johnny Cash. A few locals sat in booths, talking over beers, while an older man nursed a whiskey at the far end of the bar. Sarah made her way to the counter, sliding onto a stool. The bartender, a woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair, eyed her with the kind of curiosity reserved for newcomers. "What'll it be?" "Whiskey." "Neat," the bartender smirked. "Not from around here, huh?" "That obvious?" She chuckled, pouring the drink. "You've got the look of a traveler." Sarah took a sip, the burn familiar and grounding. "Yeah, something like that." Before the bartender could pry further, the door swung open and Sarah knew, before even turning her head, that it was him. Asher walked in like he belonged there, which, she supposed, he did. He gave the bartender a nod, then spotted her and made his way over. "You weren't kidding," Sarah said as he took the seat beside her. "Good whiskey, terrible karaoke," Asher smirked. "Give it time. Someone's bound to butcher a song soon." The bartender slid him a beer without asking. Clearly he was a regular. "You're sticking around then?" he asked, taking a sip. "For now." She swirled the whiskey in her glass, watching the amber liquid catch the light. "Bike's gotta get fixed, right?" "That's just an excuse." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "You think I need an excuse?" Asher leaned back against the bar, studying her. I think people don't ride into towns like this unless they're looking for something. She let out a slow breath, but didn't answer. Because in a way he was right and he didn't push. Instead, they sat there, letting the silence stretch between them, not uncomfortable but charged with something unspoken. Then, right on cue, the jukebox switched to an upbeat tune, and a man in his 60s, clearly several drinks in, grabbed the microphone near the small stage. Asher chuckled. Told you. The man launched into a painfully off-key rendition of Take Me Home, Country Roads, and the entire bar erupted in laughter. Sarah smirked, shaking her head. You weren't lying. You learned to expect it, Asher said. Sarah took another sip of her whiskey, considering him. So, what's your excuse? For what? For being here? You said people don't end up in places like this unless they're looking for something. Asher exhaled, running a hand through his dark hair. I was born here. That's not an answer. It's the truth. Sarah tilted her head, waiting. He took another sip of beer before finally saying, Some people leave, some people stay. My dad built that shop from nothing, kept it running for 30 years. When he passed, there wasn't much choice. But if there was, he glanced at her. I don't know. Maybe I'd still be here, maybe not. Sarah studied him, trying to read between the lines. There was something about him, something grounded, solid, but also something restrained, like a man who had learned to accept life as it was, rather than how it could be. You're good at it, though, she said after a moment. What? Fixing things. Asher smirked. Machines make sense. Sarah swirled the whiskey in her glass. People don't? Nope. She chuckled. That's fair. The night stretched on, easy conversation flowing between them. Sarah learned that Asher had been running the shop alone for the past 5 years, that he spent his free time restoring classic cars, that he preferred working with his hands to anything else. He, in turn, learned that she had been on the road for months, that she never stayed in one place for too long, that she wasn't in a rush to get anywhere. By the time they stepped outside, the air was crisp, the sky littered with stars. Sarah leaned against her bike, glancing at him. So what happens now? Asher crossed his arms, smirking slightly. Now you take that drink as payment and consider your debt settled. She laughed. That easy, huh? That easy. For a second, neither of them moved. The air between them shifted, something lingering just beneath the surface. Then Sarah pulled on her helmet. Well, Holt, I'll see you around. Asher nodded. See you around, Belmont. She kicked the engine to life, and this time the Harley purred beneath her like it was supposed to. She rode off into the night, but this time she didn't feel like she was running. And for the first time in a long time, she wasn't entirely sure she wanted to leave. Morning came slowly in Clearwater, Montana. The town stirred to life as the first rays of sunlight stretched over the horizon, casting long golden shadows over Main Street. The scent of fresh-brewed coffee drifted from Maggie's diner, mingling with the crisp morning air. At Holt's Auto Repair, Asher Holt stood by the open garage doors, a steaming mug of black coffee in one hand and a socket wrench in the other. He had already been working for an hour, losing himself in the rhythm of repairing an old Chevy. It was easier that way, easier than thinking about the conversation he'd had last night. Sarah Belmont. She was different. He could tell from the moment she stepped into his shop. Most people passing through Clearwater were just that, passing through. But something about her made him feel like she wasn't just another traveler, and for some reason he hoped she'd stay a little longer. The low growl of a familiar Harley-Davidson pulled Asher from his thoughts. He looked up, just as Sarah rolled into the lot, her bike moving smoother than the night before. She cut the engine and swung off effortlessly, tucking her helmet under her arm. "Morning, Holt," she said, smirking. Asher raised an eyebrow. "Didn't expect to see you this early," she shrugged. "Didn't expect to be up this early, but I figured since I'm stuck here for another day or two, I might as well make myself useful. Asher smirked. You offering free labor? Don't act so surprised. I told you, I know my way around an engine. Asher took a slow sip of his coffee, considering her. He could have turned her down, told her to enjoy her time in town, but something about the way she leaned against the doorway, like she wanted to belong, even if just for a little while, made him nod toward the tool bench. All right then, Belmont, let's see what you've got. The next few hours passed in an easy rhythm. Sarah worked beside Asher, sleeves rolled up, grease staining her fingers as she tightened bolts and checked wiring. She wasn't just pretending to know what she was doing. She was good. You ever work in a shop before? Asher asked as he handed her a wrench. Not exactly, she said, focusing on the task. But my dad, he used to fix up old bikes when I was a kid. He taught me the basics before he got too busy with... She stopped, then shook her head. Let's just say, life got in the way. Asher caught the shift in her tone but didn't press. He had his own stories that were better left unsaid. Instead, he changed the subject. You planning on sticking around longer than a few days? Sarah smirked. You trying to recruit me? Just curious. She considered his question, wiping her hands on a rag. I don't know yet. Clearwater's different. Different how? She glanced at him, then around the shop. Quieter, real. No noise, no pressure. You don't like noise. I've had enough of it for a lifetime. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Asher nodded toward the counter. Lunch break. You hungry? Sarah's stomach growled before she could answer, making them both chuckle. All right, fine. But if this is your way of trying to get free labor and feed me, I should probably start charging an hourly rate. Asher smirked. I'll risk it. Maggie's Diner was the heart of Clearwater. It had been around for decades, serving the best pancakes and coffee in town. Asher and Sarah slid into a booth by the window, the scent of bacon and fresh brewed coffee filling the air. Maggie herself, a woman in her 60s with a warm smile and a no-nonsense attitude, appeared at their table. Well, Asher Holt actually brought company, Maggie said, raising an eyebrow. What's the occasion? No occasion, Asher said, taking the menu. Just lunch. Maggie turned to Sarah. You must be the mystery girl everyone's been talking about. Sarah blinked. Everyone? Sweetheart, in a town this size, everyone's business is everyone's business, Maggie said with a wink. So, what can I get you? Sarah smirked. What's good? Everything. But the burger's a town favorite. Then I'll take one of those. Maggie scribbled the order and walked off, leaving Sarah shaking her head. This town really is something else, Asher chuckled. Told you, no secrets here. Sarah took a sip of her water, her expression unreadable. You ever think about leaving? Asher considered the question. Used to. But this is home, and sometimes staying is harder than leaving. Sarah studied him for a long moment, then nodded. I get that. And somehow Asher knew she really did. The food arrived, and they ate in comfortable silence. Every now and then, Sarah would glance out the window, watching the slow life of Clearwater unfold. You know, she said eventually, I didn't expect to like this place. And now, she hesitated. I don't know yet. Asher smirked. That's better than a no. Sarah laughed softly, shaking her head. You're all right, Holt. A little broody, but all right. I'll take that as a compliment. Good, because it was one. For the first time in a long time, Asher felt something easy, natural, like he didn't have to be the guy who stayed behind, carrying the weight of the past. And for the first time in a long time, Sarah didn't feel like. She was running. She didn't know what that meant yet, but maybe, just maybe, she wanted to find out. The sky above Clearwater stretched out in an endless blue, a few wisps of clouds drifting lazily as the sun began its slow descent. The afternoon air carried the faint scent of pine and gasoline, a mix that had become strangely familiar to Sarah. Over the past 2 days, she hadn't planned to stay. She never did. But something about this town, this garage, this man, it all felt different. And that was dangerous. Back at Holt's Auto Repair, Asher was underneath an old Chevrolet, his legs sticking out from beneath the frame as he tightened a rusted bolt. The rhythmic sound of metal against metal echoed in the quiet shop. Sarah stood nearby, pretending to be occupied with sorting through a set of wrenches, but her mind was elsewhere, lingering, questioning. "Pass me the half-inch socket?" Asher's voice came from beneath the car. She snapped back to the present and grabbed the right tool, handing it to him. "You know, if this whole mechanic thing doesn't work out, you could start a business training psychic abilities." Asher slid out from under the truck, smirking as he wiped his hands on a rag. "You talk to someone long enough, you start to learn how they think." Sarah leaned against the workbench, watching him. "That's so." He nodded, tossing the wrench into the toolbox. "Like you don't stay in one place for too long." Her stomach twisted, but she kept her expression neutral. "And what makes you say that?" Asher shrugged, his piercing gaze steady. "People like to plant roots, but you keep one foot on the ground and one on the gas." Sarah forced a chuckle. "That's poetic, Holt. Just an observation." He tossed the rag onto the counter and leaned beside her. "You ever think about stopping?" The air between them shifted. Sarah swallowed, looking away. "Stopping's never really been my thing," she admitted. "Why not?" She hesitated, gripping the edge of the workbench. "Because stopping means you've got something to lose." Asher studied her for a long moment. "And that scares you?" Sarah exhaled, tilting her head toward him. "Doesn't it scare you?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he picked up a wrench, running his fingers over the cool metal as if weighing his response. "Yeah," he said finally. "It does." And just like that, a quiet understanding settled between them. Later that evening, Asher and Sarah sat outside the garage, the air cool against their skin. The hum of crickets filled the silence between them. "Tell me about your dad," Sarah said suddenly. Asher glanced at her, surprised. "Why?" she shrugged. "Because people don't just stay in a town like this without a reason." Asher sighed, leaning forward, elbows on his knees. "He was a good man, hard-working, honest. He built this place from the ground up, worked his ass off to keep it running." Sarah listened quietly as he continued. "He always told me that fixing things wasn't just about making them run. It was about understanding what went wrong in the first place." He paused, his jaw tightening slightly. "When he got sick, I took over. Thought maybe I could fix it somehow, but..." He didn't need to finish the sentence. Sarah nodded. "I get that." Asher gave her a sideways glance. "Your dad, he teach you about bikes?" She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Yeah, when I was a kid, we used to work on them together. It was the only time he wasn't busy. With other things?" "Other things?" Sarah hesitated. Then, with a sigh, she leaned back against the garage wall. "Meet Richard Belmont. Business mogul, investor, and overall great at pretending to give a damn about things that don't involve money." Asher didn't react, just listened. "My mom died when I was young. After that, my dad threw himself into work. I think he figured as long as he provided a big house, fancy cars, and private schools, it'd be enough." She let out a hollow laugh. "Turns out a bank account doesn't make up for missing your kid's entire childhood." For a while, Asher didn't say anything. Then he asked, "Is that why you left?" Sarah met his gaze. "I left because I didn't want to turn into him." The confession hung between them, raw and real. After a moment, Asher nodded, reaching for a beer from the small cooler beside him. Without a word, he handed one to her. She took it, exhaling. "So, what's your excuse?" "For what?" "For staying." Asher twisted the cap off his beer. "Because someone has to." She frowned. "That's a terrible reason." He smirked. Maybe, but it's the truth. Sarah shook her head with a laugh. You ever thought about leaving? Asher took a slow zip. Yeah. And sometimes staying is the harder choice. Sarah studied him, something stirring in her chest. She wasn't used to people like him, people who didn't run. And the strangest part, she wasn't sure she wanted to run from him either. Asher leaned back, staring up at the sky. You sticking around tomorrow? Sarah exhaled. I don't know yet, but she did. She knew, because for the first time in a long time, she wasn't thinking about the next town, the next road, the next exit. For the first time in a long time, she was thinking about staying, and that terrified her. Clearwater came alive in ways Sarah hadn't expected. She had spent the past few days getting used to its slow, steady rhythm. The quiet mornings, the friendly nods from strangers, the way the town seemed to exhale at sunset. But today, everything felt different. The annual Fall Festival had transformed Main Street into something out of a postcard. Banners of deep orange and golden yellow stretched across lampposts, the air filled with the scent of caramel apples, kettle corn and wood smoke. Stalls lined the sidewalks selling homemade candles, knit scarves and baked goods. Families moved between them, laughter mixing with the lively strumming of a bluegrass band playing near the town square. Sarah had planned to keep her distance. She had spent years avoiding things like this, things that felt permanent, things that felt like belonging. But when Asher appeared at the garage that morning, leaning against the doorway with his arms crossed and an infuriatingly casual smirk, her fate had been sealed. You can't be in Clearwater during the Fall Festival and not go, he had said. I beg to differ, she had countered, arms crossed. He had just chuckled. Come on, Belmont, live a little. And damn it, she had. Agreed. Sarah wandered through the festival beside Asher, a warm cup of apple cider in her hands. She felt strangely out of place among the locals, people who had known each other their whole lives, people who weren't running, but she also didn't feel like leaving. That was new. You look like someone who hasn't been to a town fair. Since she was a kid, Asher observed, eyeing her as they passed a booth selling homemade pies. That obvious? She smirked. A little. She took a sip of her cider. I wasn't exactly the hometown festival type growing up. No? More like the business galas and silent auctions type. Asher made a face. That sounds awful. Oh, it was. He chuckled. I don't know. I can see it. Sarah Belmont, future CEO, wearing some ridiculous cocktail dress, shaking hands with men in overpriced suits. She gave him a deadpan stare. Careful, Holt. You're about to get cider. In your face, he raised his hands in surrender. Just saying. You've got the too cool for small-town fun vibe. Sarah rolled her eyes. And yet here I am. He tilted his head, studying her. Yeah, here you are. And for some reason, that made something tighten in her chest. They stopped near a booth where a little girl, no older than 6, struggled to fix the chain on her bike. She had tears in her big blue eyes, frustration clear on her tiny face. Before Sarah could react, Asher was already moving. Here, sweetheart, he said, crouching beside her. Let me take a look. The girl sniffled. It won't work. Sure it will, Asher said, his voice warm, steady. We just have to be patient. Sarah watched as he worked, his hands gentle as he fixed the chain, his voice soothing as he explained what he was doing. The girl watched in awe, sniffling less and less. There, Asher said a moment later, dusting his hands off. Good as new, the girl's face lit up. Really? Really? She grinned and threw her tiny arms around his neck. Thank you, mister, Asher chuckled, patting her back. Any time, kid. The girl's mother appeared, smiling gratefully. Thank you so much. She's been crying about that all afternoon. No problem at all, Asher replied, standing. As the mother and daughter walked off, Sarah found herself staring at him. What? He asked, noticing her expression. She shook her head, a small smile playing on her lips. Nothing, just, you surprise me, Holt, he smirked. Good or bad? She sipped her cider, still deciding. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, the festival lights flickered on, casting a warm glow over the streets. Sarah and Asher found themselves near the pumpkin patch, where a makeshift hay bale seating area had been set up. So, Asher said, leaning back against the bale, arms resting behind his head. What's next for you? She hesitated. You mean after my bike is fixed? Yeah. She exhaled slowly. Not sure. It wasn't a lie. For the first time in years, she didn't have a plan. She hesitated. I think I got tired of chasing something I couldn't name. Asher didn't say anything, just listened. Sarah picked at a loose thread on her sleeve. I used to think if I kept moving, I'd figure it out. But lately, don't know. She glanced at him, expecting judgment, but there was none, just quiet understanding. Maybe the answer isn't somewhere else, he said after a moment. Maybe it's just about stopping long enough to see what's in front of you. Something inside her twisted at that, because she knew. He wasn't just talking about her journey, he was talking about here, about them, and that scared the hell out of her. Asher stretched, standing. Come on, there's one more thing you have to do before I let you leave this festival. Sarah narrowed her eyes. I don't like the sound of that. He smirked, nodding toward the Ferris wheel at the far end of the festival grounds. Oh, hell no. Oh, hell yes, he countered. She crossed her arms. I don't do Ferris wheels. You do now. Why? Because I'm not letting you leave Clearwater without at least one cheesy small-town festival experience. She sighed dramatically, but let him lead the way. A few minutes later, they were at the top of the Ferris wheel, the town stretching out below them, bathed in the soft glow of festival lights. Sarah exhaled, something settling in her chest. This town, she murmured. What about it? Asher asked. She shook her head. It's dangerous. He raised an eyebrow. How so? She glanced at him. Because it makes me want to stay. And Asher, he just smiled. The festival had come and gone, leaving behind the lingering scent of caramel and the distant hum of memories carried on the crisp autumn air. Clearwater was settling back into its usual slow rhythm. But for Sarah, nothing felt quite the same. She had meant to leave by now. She always left. But here she was, still in this town, still waking up to the sound of Asher's garage door rolling open in the morning, still drinking coffee at Maggie's diner, still pretending she didn't notice how much she was starting to feel at home, and that was dangerous. Sarah pulled into Holt's Auto Repair early, the Harley rumbling beneath her before she cut the engine. She slid off the bike, tossing her helmet. Onto the nearest workbench, Asher barely glanced up from where he was under the hood of a battered Ford Bronco. You're getting predictable, she smirked, and here I thought you liked predictable. I do. He wiped his hands on a rag before leaning against the truck. I just didn't think you did. She shrugged. Guess I'm full of surprises. His gaze lingered on her, something unreadable in those deep-set eyes, but he didn't push. That was something she liked about him. He never asked for more than she was willing to give, but at the same time she could feel the unspoken words between them, the weight of something building, something neither of them had admitted yet. That afternoon, Asher surprised her. You ever been up to Blackwood Ridge? He asked casually as he wiped down a wrench. Sarah frowned. Can't say I have. Then let's fix that. A few minutes later, they were on their bikes, roaring down the highway toward the hills outside. Town. The wind bit at Sarah's skin, but she welcomed the rush. Riding always gave her clarity, the feeling of moving forward, of always having an escape. But today, she wasn't escaping anything. She was just with him. They stopped at a scenic overlook, the land stretching out below them in an endless sea of gold and green. The valley below was vast, untouched, the kind of place that made the world feel big and small all at once. Sarah climbed off her bike, crossing her arms as she gazed at the view. "Not bad, Holt," Asher smirked. "I have my moments." They stood there for a while, the silence easy between them. Then Asher broke it. "You're staying longer than you planned." It wasn't a question. Sarah swallowed, feeling the weight of his words. "I guess I am." He turned toward her, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. "You thinking of making it permanent?" Sarah let out a short laugh, shaking her head. "I don't do permanent." Asher studied her, his gaze steady. "Maybe you just haven't found the right place yet." She turned away, staring out at the valley. "Or maybe I was never meant to stay anywhere." He was quiet for a long time before he finally said, "That's a lonely way to live." The words hit her harder than she expected. She wasn't sure. Why? Maybe because he wasn't wrong. They rode back into town as the sun dipped behind the mountains, casting long shadows over Main Street. As they pulled up to the garage, Sarah swung off her bike, tension still coiled in her chest. Asher, ever observant, caught it immediately. "What's wrong?" he asked, voice low. Sarah exhaled sharply, running a hand through her hair. "Why do you care so much, Asher?" His brows furrowed. "What's that supposed to mean?" "I mean," she gestured vaguely, frustration bubbling to the surface. "Why do you act like where I go, what I do, matters to you?" Asher's jaw tightened. "Because it does." Sarah's heart pounded at the quiet force behind his words. "You don't even know me." "I know enough," he shot back. She let out a bitter laugh. "You think just because we've spent a few days fixing engines together, that means you understand me? I think I see you better than you want me to," he said evenly. And damn it, that scared her more than anything. Because what if he was right? What if he saw through the walls? She had spent years building. She shook her head, stepping back. "I should go." Asher's gaze darkened, but he nodded. "Yeah, maybe you should." And just like that, the thing between them, whatever it was, whatever it could have been, cracked. Sarah didn't leave Clearwater that night. She had meant to. But instead, she found herself sitting on the porch of her motel room, staring out at the darkened town, replaying Asher's words in her head. That's a lonely way to live. Damn him for making her question everything she thought she knew about herself. Because the truth, the terrifying, undeniable truth, was that she had never felt less alone than she did with him, and she had no idea what to do about that. Sarah had spent years perfecting the art of disappearing. It was easy. Pack up, hit the road, and never look back. Never stay long enough for anyone to ask too many questions. Never let anyone close enough to see the cracks. But Clearwater had ruined that, because now, for the first time in years, she didn't want to leave, and that scared her more than anything. The morning air was crisp as Sarah walked into Maggie's diner, the bell above the door chiming softly. She had barely slept, her mind tangled in thoughts of Asher, of their fight, of the things she hadn't wanted to hear but couldn't ignore. Maggie, ever perceptive, gave her a knowing look from behind the counter. "Rough night, sweetheart." Sarah slid onto a stool, sighing. "Something like that." Maggie poured her a cup of coffee, leaning on the counter. "You want to talk about it?" Sarah hesitated. Then with a humorless chuckle she said, "Hypothetically speaking, what would you do if you found yourself wanting to stay somewhere when you know you're not supposed to?" Maggie tilted her head, considering her. "Well, that depends." "Who told you you're not supposed to stay?" Sarah didn't answer. Maggie smirked. "Thought so." Before Sarah could respond, the diner door swung open, and the easy warmth she had begun to feel shattered. Because standing there, looking like he had stepped out of another world, was Logan Whitmore, her father's personal assistant. And that could only mean one thing. Her cover was blown. Sarah felt her stomach twist as Logan strode toward her, his expensive loafers clicking against the tiled floor. "I finally found you," he said, his voice smooth but edged with irritation. "Do you have any idea how long I've been looking?" Sarah clenched her jaw. "Not long enough, apparently." Maggie, sensing the shift in the air, took a step back. "Everything all right here?" Sarah forced a tight smile. "Yeah, just an unexpected guest." Logan sighed, sliding into the stool beside her. "Serafina, your father is done waiting. It's time to come home." Sarah let out a dry laugh. "Home?" She shook her head. "I don't have a home, Logan. Just places I used to be." "You have responsibilities," he pressed, lowering his voice. "The company, the estate." "I don't want the company," she snapped, her voice sharper than she intended. "I never did." Logan sighed, rubbing his temple. "You're making this harder than it has to be. You know how your father is. The longer you stay off the grid, the worse this gets." Sarah exhaled, forcing herself to stay calm. "I'm not a child. He can't force me to do anything." Logan's expression softened just slightly. "No, but you and I both know he won't stop." She hated that he was right. And what was worse, Asher was going to find out. It didn't take long for news to spread in Clearwater. By the time Sarah walked into Holt's Auto Repair, Asher was already standing outside, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. She braced herself. "So I'm guessing you heard?" Asher nodded. "Someone in town recognized your last name. Didn't take much digging." Sarah sighed. "I wanted to tell you." "Did you?" His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it. Something just beneath the surface. She swallowed. "I didn't lie to you, Asher. I just didn't tell you everything." He exhaled, shaking his head. "You're a Belmont, Sarah. Your family owns half of Manhattan." "And I walked away from all of it," she said quickly. "I didn't want that life." Asher's jaw tightened. "You didn't think that was something I should know?" Sarah hesitated. "Would it have changed anything?" He let out a short laugh, running a hand through his hair. "Are you serious?" "Yeah, Sarah, it might have." Silence stretched between them. Sarah clenched her fists. "I was never pretending with you. Everything here, it was real." Asher held her gaze for a long moment. Then finally he said, "I don't know if I can believe that." The words cut deeper than she expected, and for the first time since she arrived in Clearwater, Sarah truly felt like an outsider. Sarah had never been one to beg. So when she turned to leave, she didn't stop, didn't look back, didn't let herself feel the ache blooming in her chest. Asher didn't stop her, and that hurt the most. That night, as Sarah packed her bag, she thought about all the things she wanted to say. That Clearwater had felt like home in a way no other place had, that Asher had made her feel seen, maybe for the first time in her life, that she wasn't ready to leave, but she had spent her whole life running, and she didn't know how to stop now. So she threw her bag over her shoulder, grabbed her keys, and stepped outside into the cold night. Because maybe leaving was easier than facing the truth. Maybe it always had been. The neon glow of Clearwater's only motel flickered against the cold night air. Sarah sat on the edge of the bed, duffel bag packed at her feet, the weight of the past hour pressing down on her like a stone. She had spent years learning how to walk away. So why was it so damn hard this time? Her hands tightened into fists as she stared at her keys on the nightstand, the glint of metal catching the dim motel light. One turn, one highway, and she'd be gone. But she didn't move, because, for the first time in her life, she wasn't sure she wanted to run. Across town, Asher Holt sat alone in his garage, a beer bottle in one hand. His thoughts tangled in knots. He should have seen it coming. People like Sarah, they didn't stay. She had been a hurricane from the start, crashing into his life, turning everything upside down. And now, just as suddenly, she was gone. And it shouldn't have hurt this much, but it did. The shop felt too quiet without her smart remarks, without the sound of her boots against the concrete, without the way she'd roll her eyes, but secretly enjoy working on an engine beside him. And damn it, he missed her already. But missing her didn't change the truth. She had lied. Or maybe not. Lied, but she hadn't trusted him enough to tell him the truth, and that stung more than anything. The clock ticked past midnight. Sarah sat motionless, staring at her reflection in the motel window, her breath fogging up the glass. Her whole life. She had convinced herself that staying meant losing herself, that standing still meant getting trapped. But was that true? Because right now, leaving didn't feel like freedom. It felt like losing something important, maybe even the most important thing. She exhaled sharply and grabbed her keys. And then, before she could second-guess herself, she walked out the door, not toward the highway, but back toward him. By the time she reached the garage, the night had turned stormy, a cold wind kicking up dust as she stepped into the dim glow of the shop. Lights. Asher was still there, standing near the workbench, his back to her. She hesitated in the doorway, watching him. He knew she was there. She could tell by the way his shoulders tensed, by the way his hands curled slightly against the edge of the workbench. Finally, he turned. His expression was unreadable, guarded, closed off, and for the first time since she had met him, she realized she might have actually broken something between them. "What are you doing here?" he asked, voice quiet but edged with something sharp. Sarah took a slow breath. "I don't know." His eyes flickered, something like frustration flashing through them. "That's not an answer," she exhaled, stepping closer. "I wanted to explain." Asher shook his head. "What's left to explain, Sarah? You come from a world that doesn't include this town, this life, me." "That's not true," she said quickly. "I left that world." "Did you?" He let out a humorless laugh. "Because it sure as hell found you pretty fast." She flinched. "I didn't choose to be born into that family, Asher, but I chose to walk away. And yet you didn't trust me enough to tell me the truth." Silence. Sarah swallowed hard. "I was scared." Asher's jaw tightened. "Of what?" "That if you knew, everything would change," she admitted, voice raw. And there it was, the truth she had been afraid to say out loud. Asher stared at her for a long moment, something unreadable in his gaze, and then, finally, he sighed. "Everything already changed, Sarah." The rain started softly, a light drizzle tapping against the garage roof. Sarah stepped forward. "I didn't lie to you, Asher," he exhaled, shaking his head. "You just didn't tell me the truth." "That's different, not to me." The words hit harder than she expected. She had thought that coming back, admitting the truth, would be enough. But now, standing in front of him, she realized some things couldn't be fixed with apologies, and maybe this was one of them. Sarah's heart pounded. "So, what now?" Asher looked at her for a long time before finally saying, "I don't know." And that scared her more than anything. The storm outside picked up, thunder rumbling in the distance. Sarah knew she had a choice. She could run, like she always did, or she could stay. But staying meant risking everything. It meant being vulnerable, being honest, being real, and for the first time, she didn't know if she was strong enough for that, so she did the only thing she knew how to do. She turned, walked out of the garage, and disappeared into the night. And this time, Asher didn't stop her. The rain had turned into a full-blown storm by the time Sarah reached her motel. Fat raindrops pelted the pavement, washing away the dust of Clearwater, but it couldn't wash away the ache in her chest. Her soaked jacket clung to her skin as she unlocked the door and stepped inside, her fingers trembling, not from the cold, but from the words she and Asher had exchanged. "You didn't trust me." His voice still echoed in her mind. She stripped off her wet clothes, tossing them aside, and sank onto the edge of the bed. The room was dim, the only sound the distant rumble of thunder and the steady drip of rain against the window. She had spent her whole life avoiding attachments, believing that standing still meant getting trapped. But Asher, he had made her. He questioned all of that, and now she had ruined everything. Asher stood in the open doorway of the garage, watching the storm rage on. The shop lights cast long shadows across the concrete floor, but the emptiness felt different tonight. He had spent The past few years avoiding complications, focusing on his work, keeping things simple. Then she had walked in, challenging everything he thought he wanted, and now she was gone, again. He ran a hand through his damp hair, letting out a slow breath. Maybe he had been too hard on her. Maybe he had let his pride get in the way of what really mattered. But trust, it wasn't something he gave easily. And finding out who she really was, from someone else, had shaken him more than he wanted to admit. He had thought she was different, but was she? The storm outside roared, but inside, Asher had never felt quieter. The first crack of lightning split. The sky followed almost immediately by a blackout. The entire street went dark, Maggie's diner, the motel, even Holt's garage. Then the siren started. Asher's head snapped up. He tossed his beer onto the workbench, already grabbing his jacket as he stepped outside. From across town, he could see smoke rising, thick and dark against the rain-heavy sky. Something was on fire. Sarah had barely moved from her spot on the bed when she heard the distant wail of sirens. She sat up, heart pounding, then she saw it. Through the rain-streaked window, a thick column of smoke curling into the night sky. Her pulse kicked up. She was already grabbing her jacket before her mind had fully processed it. Please don't let it be the garage. The thought repeated itself as she rushed out into the storm, her boots splashing through puddles. The cold rain stung her skin, but she barely felt it. The streets were chaotic, people running toward the fire, shouting. Then she heard someone say it. It's Mrs. Thompson's place. Sarah knew the name. Mrs. Thompson owned the small bookstore on Main Street, the one tucked between the post office and the antique shop. She was in her 70s, a woman with kind eyes and a habit of giving free books to kids who couldn't afford them. And now her shop, and the apartment above it, was burning. Sarah barely registered, pushing through the crowd before she saw Asher, already moving toward the building with 2 firefighters. She had never seen him like this. His face was set, determined, but there was something else, something reckless in the way he moved. Because he wasn't just standing there, he was going in. Sarah's heart stopped. Asher, wait! But he was already gone. The front of the bookstore was in flames, the wooden beams crackling under the heat. Someone's still inside! One of the firefighters shouted, Mrs. Thompson. Sarah's stomach twisted as Asher disappeared. Into the smoke. She couldn't just stand there. Without thinking, she ran after him. The heat was suffocating. Sarah pushed forward, coughing as smoke clawed at her throat. Through the haze, she could make out Asher, already helping Mrs. Thompson down the stairs. Her frail frame sagged against him, too weak to walk on her own. Sarah rushed forward, grabbing the older woman's other arm. "We've got you!" Asher's gaze snapped to her, disbelief flashing in his eyes. "What the hell are you doing?" "Saving your ass," she shot back, tightening her grip on Mrs. Thompson. "Now move!" They stumbled toward the exit as the fire roared louder behind them. The moment they burst outside, hands grabbed them, helping Mrs. Thompson to safety. Sarah barely had time to catch her breath before Asher turned on her. "Are you insane?" he demanded, his voice rough from smoke. She coughed, trying to catch her breath. "You went in first. That's different," she scoffed. "How?" "Because I don't run into burning buildings when I have other options." She met his glare with one of her own. "And what if you didn't make it out?" His jaw clenched. "Then at least it would have been my choice." Sarah's heart pounded. "And maybe it was mine too." The words hung between them, heavy and undeniably real. The adrenaline was still rushing through her veins, but it wasn't just from the fire. It was from him, from how close they were standing, from the way his eyes searched hers like he was trying to figure her out all over again. For the first time since she'd met him, she wasn't scared of running. She was scared of staying, because staying meant feeling, and feeling meant risking everything. She opened her mouth, but before she could speak, Asher exhaled sharply and ran a hand through his hair, stepping back. "Sarah." He shook his head. I don't know what you want. Neither did she, but she knew one thing. She wanted him, and this town, and this life. But wanting and choosing weren't the same thing, and she had no idea if she was brave enough to make the right choice. The scent of smoke and rain still lingered in the air the next morning. Clearwater had settled into a quiet hum after the chaos of the fire. The sky was grey, the streets damp, and though the flames had been extinguished, the remnants of the bookstore, the blackened beams, the crumbling facade, stood as a stark reminder of what had almost been lost. Sarah sat on the steps outside Maggie's diner, a steaming cup of coffee in her hands, watching as life in town slowly returned to normal. But inside, nothing felt normal, because for the first time since she had arrived in Clearwater, she wasn't thinking about leaving. She was thinking about staying, and that scared her more than anything. The bell above the diner door jingled, and Sarah didn't need to look up to know who it was. She felt him before she saw him. Asher. He sat down beside her, silent for a moment. She could feel the tension in the space between them, a weight neither of them knew how to lift. Finally, he spoke. "Mrs. Thompson's gonna be okay." Sarah nodded, taking a sip of her coffee. "I'm glad." Asher leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. "Oh, they're already talking about rebuilding the bookstore. Whole town's chipping in." Sarah glanced at him. "You're helping?" He smirked slightly. "Wouldn't feel right not to." That was Asher, always fixing things. But what about them? Could that be fixed too? She took a deep breath. "About last night, you scared the hell out of me, Sarah." His voice was quieter than she expected. She turned to face him fully, her fingers tightening around the warm ceramic mug. "I couldn't just stand there and do nothing." "I get that," he said, running a hand through his hair. "But when I saw you run in after me, He shook his head. "I don't know what I would have done if something happened to you." Sarah's chest tightened. "You didn't hesitate. You went straight in." He exhaled. "That's different." She tilted her head. "Why?" His jaw tensed, his fingers clenching against his knees. "Because I've already lost people, Sarah. I didn't want to lose you, too." The words hit her like a punch to the ribs. He looked away, his expression guarded, but she could see it. The fear, the vulnerability he tried so hard to hide. This wasn't just about the fire. This was about them. And finally, Sarah understood. She set her coffee down, turning toward him. "Asher, I know I messed up. I should have told you who I was from the start. But I swear, everything I felt here was real." He didn't say anything, but he didn't look away either. Encouraged, she continued, "I spent my whole life running because I thought if I stopped, if I let people in, I'd just end up disappointed. That's what my father taught me, that the only thing you can count on is yourself." Asher's brow furrowed, but he stayed silent. Sarah exhaled. "But then I met you. And for the first time I started to wonder if maybe he was wrong." A flicker of something crossed his face. Hope, doubt. She couldn't tell. But last night... She trailed off, swallowing hard. "You said you didn't know if you could believe me." Asher sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "It wasn't about whether or not I believed you, Sarah. It was about whether or not you were ever going to stop running long enough to believe in yourself." The words cut deep, because she knew he was right. She had spent so long convincing herself that she wasn't meant to stay anywhere, that she had never stopped to ask if that was really true. And now, she wasn't sure she wanted to leave. Gust of wind swept through the street, carrying the scent of rain-soaked earth and something else, something that smelled like possibility. Sarah took a breath. She had two choices. She could leave, like she always did. Get on her bike, head toward the next town, bury whatever this was before it became too real. Or she could stay. For once in her life, she could choose something different. She looked at Asher, really looked at him, the man who had seen through. Every wall she'd built, who had challenged her in ways no one else had, who had made her feel something she hadn't let herself feel in years. "I don't want to run anymore," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. His gaze searched, hers something shifting in his expression. "Then don't." Her heart pounded. "It's not that simple," she said. "It is," he countered. "You just have to decide if it's what you really want." Sarah swallowed hard. She had spent her whole life believing that belonging was a trap. But what if she had been wrong? What if belonging wasn't about being tied down? What if it was about having something worth staying for? She exhaled, the weight of the decision settling in her chest. Then finally she looked at him, and she made her choice. "I'm staying." For a moment, Asher didn't move, didn't speak. Then, slowly, he let out a breath, one that sounded like relief. "Good," he said, voice softer now. "Because I don't want you to go." She let out a shaky laugh. "That makes two of us." The tension between them melted, replaced by something warmer, deeper, unspoken but understood. This wasn't just about Clearwater. This was about trust, about taking a risk, about choosing each other. And as Asher reached for her hand, fingers threading through hers with a quiet certainty, Sarah knew, for the first time in her life, she had made the right choice. She wasn't running anymore. She was finally home. The sun dipped low over Clearwater, casting long golden streaks across the sky. The town, still recovering from the fire, was alive with movement, neighbors helping neighbors, voices carrying through the crisp autumn air, and the unmistakable hum of rebuilding. Sarah stood outside Holt's Auto Repair, leaning against her Harley, watching the town come together, and for the first time in her life, she didn't feel like an outsider. She felt like she belonged. The familiar sound of boots against pavement made her glance up. Asher stood a few feet away, hands tucked into his jacket pockets, studying her the way he always did, like he saw. Past the surface, past the walls, straight to the core of who she was. "You still here?" he noted, a hint of a smirk in his voice. She arched a brow. "You sound surprised." "Maybe a little," he admitted. "Thought you'd be halfway." "Across the country by now," she exhaled, glancing at the bike beside her. "I thought about it. And..." She looked at him then, really looked at him. "And I realized I was tired of leaving." Something flickered in his eyes, something that looked a lot like relief. "So, what does that mean?" he asked, voice quieter now. Sarah took a step closer. "It means I want to stay." The words settled between them, heavier than the cool evening air. She had never said those words before, not to anyone, not about anywhere. But saying them now, to him, it felt right. Asher let out a slow breath, shaking his head with a small chuckle. "You're really full of surprises, Belmont," Sarah smirked. "You're just figuring that out?" He huffed a quiet laugh, then took a step toward her, closing the space between them. His hands were rough and warm when they found hers, fingers threading through hers like they had always belonged there. "I'm glad you stayed," he admitted. Sarah squeezed his hand. "Me too." The following weeks were a whirlwind of change. The town came together to rebuild Mrs. Thompson's bookstore, raising donations, volunteering hours, making sure that one of Clearwater's oldest landmarks would stand again. And Asher, he wasn't just fixing cars anymore. He was fixing something bigger, helping rebuild the heart of the town, one brick, one beam, one moment at a time. And Sarah, she stayed. She didn't just linger. She rooted herself. At first, she helped out at the garage, pretending it was just temporary, just until she figured out her next step. But the more time she spent in that old shop, working alongside Asher, feeling the warmth of the community, the more she realized she didn't need a next step. She had already found it. One evening, as the last of the sun faded behind the mountains, Asher and Sarah sat outside the garage, 2 beers resting between them, their hands loosely linked. "You ever regret staying?" Asher asked, his voice low, almost hesitant. Sarah turned to him, lips curving. Not for a second. His gaze softened. Even when things slow down, when it's not all festival lights and excitement, she laughed. Asher, my life has been nothing but running and excitement. This? She gestured to the quiet street. To the garage, to the life she had started building here. This is the first thing that's ever felt real. He was quiet for a moment, then he nodded, as if finally accepting that she meant it, that she wasn't going anywhere. And then, in the warm glow of the garage lights, Asher leaned in, pressing a slow, lingering kiss to her lips. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't fleeting. It was steady, certain, just like them. Months later, winter settled over Clearwater, the first snowfall dusting the rooftops, the holiday lights twinkling along Main Street. Sarah stood outside the garage, watching as Asher worked beneath the hood of an old Mustang. It was a quiet, ordinary moment, and yet it was everything. She stepped forward, wrapping her arms around his waist from behind, resting her chin on his shoulder. Asher chuckled, wiping his hands on a rag. "You're getting sentimental on me, Belmont." Smiled against his jacket. "You're rubbing off on me, Holt." He turned in her arms, pulling her closer. "Yeah?" She nodded. "Yeah." And this time, there was no hesitation, no fear, no urge to run, because she had already made her choice, and she wasn't going anywhere. Not now, not ever. Wow, what a journey. Sarah and Asher's story is one of love, redemption, and finding a place to belong. But now I'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Are you from a small town like Clearwater, or do you love the idea of escaping to one? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss another heartwarming tale like this. Your support helps keep these stories coming, and I truly appreciate every single one of you who takes the time to listen, watch, and engage. Thank you for being here, and I'll see you in the next story.